All right, so I've actually gone ahead and solved this day already, but I didn't like my solution because it was a little bit ugly, and I also did fall victim to a couple pitfalls. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of redo this as a polished little solve through. So the first thing I'm going to do is when I see this question, a lot of this is fluff, and so it doesn't actually matter too much. But if you look down here, we see what the actual meat of the question is. So here it says basically we're going to have some calibration value, yada yada, where we want to combine the first digit and the last digit in that order to create a two-digit number. So this two-digit sounds like concatenation. So for example, with these things, the first one here, 12, is going to be this 1 and 2 just concatenated into a 1, 2, 12. Here, the first two digits, and sorry, the first and the last digit is 3 and an 8, so we're creating 38. And then here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We take the first and the last one, and we get a 15. And then 77 here is because the first and the last digit are the same as 7. And we add all of these together. So if I go ahead and I move this into my inputs, and I've already done this, I have this test here. And then I also have my actual input itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split all of these together. So I'm going to split all these lines. So I'm going to do lines is equal to input.split lines, nice little built-in function. And just as a little sanity check, I can go ahead and call this. And we can see that these are actually what the lines are. Now, what I can do is I can iterate through each line and solve for some total. So we'll do total 1 is going to be equal to 0. I'll do return total 1. I'll leave this for now. Sorry, going ahead because I've already done it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate through each line. So for line and lines, and if I just go ahead and print this out again, just a little sanity check, you can see it's printing out, printing out lines here, my bad. You can see that it's printing out each line. So now what I want to do is I want to strip these apart and I want to get just the digits. So what I can do is I can use the list comprehension here. So if I wanted to write this in an ugly way, I could do something like this. And then for character, so char in line, if char, and I could do something like is in like the digit string like this, but this isn't too Pythonic. So what I'm instead going to do is I'm going to go ahead and if I Google this, Python check if a character is a number, and immediately, boom, there's a method for it, because of course Python has it, it's nice. So if I go ahead now here and I say is numeric, so is numeric, then I want to add it to my digits list. So we'll do digits.append char. So the problem here is this is kind of ugly. So instead of doing all of this, I can instead toss this into a list comprehension. And so what we're doing already is for char in line, I want to add that char to this list. Only if char is numeric. And then now if I print digits, we can see I'm getting just the digits out of this. And if I comment out this and show the additional line above, we can see that it's virtually the same thing. And I think it essentially is. So the syntax for this is really nice, and list comprehensions are something I would highly recommend you get used to. But this is essentially saying add this character to the list for each character in this line if it is alphanumeric. And this is basically doing this. But it's very nice. And so now from this, what I can do is if I want to get the first and the last digit, I have digits 0 and I have digits 1. Those are the first and the last digits. If I want to concatenate them, since they're strings, I can just do this. If I print this out, you can see, oh, look, 1238. And let's not worry about this list index right now. But now that I have this, I can go ahead and do, I can turn this to an int. I can do total 1 plus equals this. If I go ahead and run this on this original test, oh, it actually looks like I'm getting a index out of bounds error. Let's see why that's happening. If I turn on the debug flag, I can see, oh, digits 0 and digits 1, sorry. This is grabbing the first and the second digits. I want to grab the first and the last digit. So giving -1 grabs around from the back. So now if I run this, for my test 1, I'm getting this. Ignore this traceback for now. This is just because I added something from part 2. But so here we can see 142. If I look at add bit of code, I see that's what the solution is. So I can go ahead and run on the actual solution. Get 53651 for me. Your input will vary. And here, that was the right answer. Now for part 2, what they're telling us to do is we want to basically see some of these digits as strings and treat these as numbers themselves. And so, for example, this should be turned into the number 2, 1, and 9 all after each other. But here's where something gets a little bit spicy. So here, see how we have 8 and 2 that are both overlapping each other? My original assumption when I solved this question is that only process the first one in order. But that's not really something valid, and also that wasn't a fair assumption to make. But so what they want you to do is they want you to turn this into an 8, a 2, and a 3. So how are we going to do that? So first of all, copy all of this over. I move this into the spelled numbers here. And then just for my own kind of sanity's sake, if I run my original input code, it actually does complain about this. Because if you look for this 823, there's no numbers in here. And so when it gets to this digit list, 0 is not a valid thing anymore. So what I'm going to do, just as a little kind of hack almost, if digits exist, like there's actually something in this list, basically if I call if and I try to turn some structure like this into a Boolean, it'll return true if there's something in it. Then only add to the total. And so for part 1, this works fine. And so this one, basically, it will just skip this line essentially. But so now the question is, how can we, I'm going to go ahead and I'll actually leave this in here. The question is, how can we turn, for example, 1 into the number 1 and also have it in a way where it doesn't overlap? So first of all, something that's going to be useful here is I'm going to create a list for this conversions. So what I did first is I created this new little list where each index represents its actual string itself. This is going to be a little bit helpful later. So I'm going to copy all of what I essentially already had, and it's fine to overwrite digits. It's fine to write line, and I just want to change this to total 2. And now I'll create another variable for this, and this is going to be for part 2. So now, and just because I shouldn't need this, because that's only if I'm getting no digits, I want to actually have that little error message here just in case something went wrong. So now in this, what I want to do is I want to basically translate this line to include all of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and create this as a function. So if I go ahead and create def translate, it's going to take in some line. So a quick little intermission here that I'm recording after I'm editing everything together. So one big pitfall that kind of happens with this is a lot of people will just try to replace the things. So like a lot of languages will have like a string replace function where I can take in, for example, the string 3 and replace it with the actual character 3. But the problem is if you do this, usually people do it in order, this will get turned into the letter to its, or the number to itself. So all of this would get consumed and this turns into a 2. And the problem is now we have just this with no t. And so we don't actually detect this as an 8. And the problem is then we would end up with a string of EIGH, the number 2, the number 3, and that's not 83 like we expect to have. And so the way to solve this is instead of just replacing this with the number itself, so for example, if we're replacing 2, we replace it with 2, the word. We then replace it with this, like the actual digit, and then we pad it on both sides. And the reason why is because if there is some other word that needed some characters to form the entire letter, or this entire word, the same way 8 does here, it has those on the left side. And same with the right. Like for example, if there's a 1 here, then we have this 2 here, so this 1 can still be formed. And this is still fine. You can kind of toy with it and prove to yourself why this is fine. And the big reason why is since we have this digit in the middle, it doesn't actually exceed anything past it, making any more strings. But basically, this is our trick for making part 2 kind of work. So now with this function, what I can do is I can call the replace function. And inside of this, I can pass in some digit name. So I'll call it name for now. And I want to replace this with name plus whatever the digit is, plus the name again. And so what I can do is I can use an enumerate loop. So for I, and then, so for num, and then name in enumerate line, oh, not line, sorry, digit names. If I print out num and name, and just call this, let's see what happens. You can see it's basically giving us the index first and then the value at it. So from this list, it'll iterate and give me both of these, which is perfect because what I want to now do is I want to do line dot replace, and I want to replace the name with the name, the number, and the name again. But the problem is I can't just add that because num is a digit and it's going to act weird. It's a number. So I'm going to use an F string, which is a format. And so I'll add name and then num and then name. And what this does is whenever I put an F before the string, anything in these curly brackets gets evaluated and gets called and turned into a string automatically. So it's turning this name, the number, and the name all the way into the string here. Now, line.replace will return a new line without modifying the line, so I will set my original line to this. And then finally, I can return my line. So now if I call this, I see I get 281. If I look here, that's what I get. So if I call this on my input, I get 53894. I can see that's actually my solution. So now let's go ahead and see if we need to clean up any code.